every one of us as church leaders should train our volunteers throughout the year. But what do we train on? I mean, usually there's so many things that we could pick. We could talk big picture about the church, vision, strategy, mission. We could talk about some specific things that they need help with because of the role that they serve in. We could talk about relational skills, leadership skills, pastoral skills. Like there's so many things that we could do and that we could focus on when it comes to training content. Sometimes it can be hard to choose. So I want to talk about 4 different types of training content that you can pick from or create from scratch when you're training your volunteers. And I think this will be helpful, especially if this isn't something that necessarily feels like natural to you, which I think is true for many of us. What content, I want to ask you here, maybe you can leave a comment below. What content do you use when you train your volunteers? So if I said, hey, in the last 5 years, what content have you used to train your volunteers? Has it been things you've bought? Like it's, you bought it as a package online somewhere from a curriculum provider, from another website? Is it something you created? Was it existing as like a book or some other resource and then you kind of like repackaged that and did that? If you've been in, vocational ministry for a long time, like I have, the answer is probably yes. You've probably done all of those things. I certainly have done all of those things. I think creating training content, like if you create it, is natural to some, but not to most. I think there are some of us leaders who love this, and we could sit down and we think about, over here I have my whiteboard, and I'm thinking about how, like, man, if I was going to do a training for our volunteers in a couple months, I would probably want to erase the whiteboard there. My girls have drawn stuff on the bottom there, and just think about, okay, what do our volunteers need, and brainstorm some options, and then from there pick one, and then start to outline it. And I do enjoy that. Probably not as much as most. I do enjoy that. I do it a lot, actually. The work we do with Ministry Boost is really that. Just the focus is on you, the church leader, instead of volunteers, and I love that. So I am wired that way. I don't think most people are necessarily wired that way, though, where they love to create training content, and then it gets even more difficult, I think, when you're talking about training volunteers, because at least when we're training church leaders, like through this video, I know that 95, if not 100% of church leaders lead volunteers and want to train those volunteers. So I already know that what we're going to talk about is going to be helpful to you. At least I think it is. I hope this is helpful to you. When it comes to volunteers, what that team needs might not be what that team needs, which is not what that ministry needs. You know what I mean? So it gets a little more difficult, and you might like creating content for some, but not for others. So whether you like that or not, like even if you don't like creating training content, these 4 types are going to help you, because you're not going to have to feel like you're starting from scratch with a blank page. I mean, it's really hard to know what everybody needs and what is most important. So I think it's going to be helpful to, use these 4 types as kind of your starting ground. You can use existing packages. I'm a big fan of that. In fact, that's one of the things that we want to do more with Ministry Boost, is create training package content that you can use with your volunteers. But sometimes, eventually, you're going to have to make your own. So don't start from scratch. Don't start with a blank page as you create your next training content. Let's talk about the 4 types of training content for leaders, and you can pick one of those types as you get started. Number 1, vision. Vision is one of the types, and it helps answer the question, why? It helps your volunteers answer the question, why? Why do we do this? Why this way? Why is this needed? Why now? And here's the thing. Most volunteers aren't coming up to you saying these questions, but in their mind, they're thinking them. And even if they don't realize they're thinking them, sometimes they're thinking them. Like they might disagree with something. Like, I wish I would do it that way. Well, in their mind, they're not thinking, why do we do it this way? I'm going to do it this way. They're just thinking, I think this might be better. But the reality is they may not know why you do it this way and why you want it done that way. If they did, maybe they would say, okay, I understand that. I see why it's better. I'll do it. Or, you know what? I don't agree, but I understand. And this is, I'm not the leader. Like if they're a sharp leader that is healthy, then hopefully they'll submit to that and say, okay, it's good that I know why. Even if I disagree, I can follow that. So we want to train on why, but there's even more reasons we want to train on why, because understanding why motivates people to do the what and the how. The why is the motivation that helps them do what they need to do and how you want them to do it. You've probably heard the phrase, what and how engage the hands, why engages the heart. So you don't want to leave this out. Throughout this video, I'm going to talk about a couple references to this book, Daniel Pink's book, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. This was done as a study in the workplace years ago to figure out what motivates employees at their job. And if I asked you, what do you think are the top 3 motivations for employees at their job, you would probably say money, career advancement, happiness. I don't know, something like that. Like those are the things that probably come to my mind. But the answers from the study, and this was a study, you didn't just make this up, from the study proved to be a little bit different. Top 3 motivations were autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, I can kind of lead myself. I'm not micromanaged. I have leadership of myself in my area, even if I'm just leading me. Mastery, I can get really good at it. Purpose, there's a bigger purpose to what I'm doing. Well, training on vision helps volunteers understand the purpose. We're the church. We're helping reach people, make disciples, introduce people to Jesus. We have the greatest purpose in the entire world. But if we don't train on it and we don't communicate it, we don't talk about why, we don't cast vision, then it doesn't matter. People won't understand the purpose. You would think they would just remember, hey, this is a church, this is a ministry. You should know why we do what we do. But it's easy to forget. Easy to forget. And it's really easy for the volunteer that holds doors on Sunday mornings to let people in to think that job is insignificant, but it's not. And that's why vision is one of the 4 types of training content that we need to use so that they don't ever forget how important it is, the job that they do. The second type of training content is strategy. So strategy, think of strategy as how. Help your volunteers know how your ministry should work, how you should do different things. You can train on the big picture strategy, like how does our church make disciples, right? You can also train on the specific details. So think about big picture, how does our church make disciples? That's a big picture how. We try to get, there's a lot of churches that have had a 5-part strategy, and here's the 5 things we do. Or my church has a 3-part strategy: celebrate, connect, contribute. If we get people celebrating in services regularly, connecting with other people in small groups, and contributing on a volunteer team and financially, if they do those things over and over and over again in their life, that's going to help them connect with Jesus and grow as disciples. That's a big picture strategy that we could train and should train our volunteers on. There's also a big picture, like how does your ministry reach new people? I was talking to a leader the other day. We were talking about volunteer recruiting. He had done one of our volunteer recruiting courses with Ministry Boost and was trying to marry that with creating a strategy to reach more families in their church. And his question was great. It was, hey, should we just focus on the volunteer recruiting thing first and then to turn attention to like a strategy to reach more families? Or should we kind of do both at the same time? And my answer was, I think you should probably focus on the volunteer thing first. It's not that you can't do both, but you want to have a good base to invite people to. But as we were talking about that, I was thinking about he's got to make a strategy to reach new families. As he does, that will be big picture. Like, yes, at some point it needs to get to the details, but right now, whenever he's ready to do that, he needs to create a high level, big picture strategy. But that can also be specific. So think about, how does your children's ministry check in new families? Like, there's a how. That happens somehow. Usually the printer doesn't work right. Something goes wrong with technology, which we don't want that to be part of the plan. That's just the harsh reality, right? But there's a how. That's an example of how a specific detail of how you could train volunteers on the strategy when it comes to new families checking in. How does your student ministry lead small group? Again, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. Here's how we want you to do it at our church and our student ministry. So train them on how to do that. So strategy can be, high level. It can be down in the weeds. Both are important. How, like talking about strategy and how, can be the difference between effective or ineffective. Think about a church that, is 80 years old, had its best success in the 1980s or 90s, and they were doing ministry a certain way then. There was a how that they were doing. I'm thinking about the church I grew up in. There was an organ with the music. In the 90s, it evolved to like a praise team where there'd be like 8 people singing on microphones on stage. There was a look and a feel to the building. There was Sunday school. There was midweek service. At one point, I think I went to church 3 or 4 times a week when I was a student. That was all how. The why hadn't changed, reach to make disciples, reach people. The what, again, that really hadn't changed. But what could have changed is the how. Now, there are a lot of churches that are still doing how they did it 40 years ago. And for many of them, it's not working anymore. Now, somebody might like it because that's what they grew up in. So for the people who are already there, might be fine. But if you're going to reach new people, that might not work. And I'm not saying it won't, but my point is the only difference between a church like that might be stuck in how they did things 40 years ago and a church that's now doing something different and seeing the fruit of that isn't the what and the why. It's the how. So the how is really, really important. So I think you should train on strategy at least once a year, particularly that big picture stuff, helping people know how this all works together, but not too often. This isn't the kind of thing you're going to want to do weekly or monthly or anything like that. So as you watch the other video at the end of this that talks about creating a year-long strategy, this is probably not going to be something you talk about every week all year long. This next one, skills, is one we probably think about, right? When we think about 4 types of training content for leaders. Skills training is probably what comes to mind. It's probably what we think of first. It's how do I help you get better? If you think about the Daniel Pink book, this is mastery. How do we help our volunteers master the role that they serve in and the skills that are required for that? Help your volunteers master their role, and that will help motivate them, just like the book says, to keep serving, to continue to come back and serve year after year. If they feel like they're failing or they're not good at it, they're not going to want to keep serving. They're not going to stick with it. It's going to be tough for them. That's something that's going to be a challenge. Skills training likely requires training in small groups by role. This is not usually something that you can do with everybody all at once. There are examples where you could do a skills training with all your volunteers. I'm thinking about like in our church, in our adult small groups ministry, every volunteer is a small group leader. You know what I mean? So even the volunteers who are coaches leading other small group leaders, like it's all still very similar. You're leading a small group of adults. We could do a skills training, and they do. That's just the same thing for everybody. You couldn't do that in my kids ministry because that volunteer is leading a small group of kindergartners. That volunteer is running tech and needs to know the specific technical skills for how to run audio, video, and lights. That volunteer is a coach leading other small group leaders, which is similar to the skills of a small group leader, but it's a little bit different. That volunteer is hosting from stage. That's a whole different skill set. That volunteer prepares resources during the week, right? So there's just, if you pulled them all together, there's 30 skills needed, probably for those 12 or 15 different volunteer roles. So that would be tough. So you probably have to find some way, if you're going to do a skills training, to get them in smaller groups. Now you could do a big training where they all come together, like, and kick it off that way. But then at some point it probably has to adjust, and maybe it breaks down into smaller settings where they can talk about skills. I think skills training is a perfect chance to outsource that, because we can't, like, think again, my children's ministry example, because of having done this for over 2 decades. Yes, I could actually train on probably every role in our kids ministry and our student ministry. But does that mean I'm the best at it? No, I'm not the best host. I'm not the best tech, even though a lot of times I've done it long enough that I know that more than a lot of people. So outsource some of this to other people. And it doesn't even have to be other people. It could be, hey, we need to train on tech. I'm okay at it, but I'm not great. But you know what? That one tech volunteer we have seems to know it really well. Could you lead a training for all of the other tech volunteers and you teach it to them? Or, hey, this small group leader has been with us for 10 years, knows it really well. Maybe they're a little hesitant to do the training like that, but I'm going to help you. Let's develop a training. And then when we break down into teams, you're going to lead the small group portion. But outsourcing can also just be some kind of content where you're not, the expert in it, but there's something they can watch. Like, for example, I just told somebody about the software I'm using to make this video right now. I can show them how to do it for sure. That's an option. But one of the things I told them was, hey, I learned it from watching this series of videos on YouTube. Here's who that creator is. Go watch some of their playlists. You'll learn way more than you'll learn from me. And then we could follow up and I could show you some things or like how I do it, but you're going to get a lot more there. That's an example of just outsourcing it. And I think skills-based training is prime for outsourcing that to other leaders because we can't be great at everything, nor do we have the time to train on everything. The fourth type of training content for leaders is leadership. Remember the three motivations: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So this is autonomy, the ability to lead myself, to not be micromanaged, to feel like I have some independence there. That's what leadership is. And don't just think of leadership for those who currently lead others. Yes, they should get specific training, but remember that everyone leads themselves and everyone could lead others. And there are some people that, they don't have the gift of leadership. They don't want that. They're going to be happy doing this role for the rest of their life. And that's great. They're still leading themselves though. And then there's a ton of people who, if given the opportunity and training, could lead others, but they need help. They need this kind of training to help them get there. Because when your volunteers become better leaders, everything benefits. Everything benefits, right? So don't neglect leadership training. A lot of times we focus on skills, we will hit vision, but then we leave out strategy and we leave out this. And if we leave this out, leaders don't get better, and that becomes a lid. The whole ministry can't improve. So choose one of these 4 types of content for your next volunteer training, and then watch the next video on creating a year-long training strategy. And make sure these 4 types of training content are mixed in there throughout the year. Maybe you're hitting some of them in that weekly training, one of them in the monthly thing, something when you do the big gathering, it's all together. Maybe you'll do some vision, but then break down into smaller groups and you'll talk skills. Just make sure you're hitting the 4 types in all of your volunteer training. If you need more help recruiting volunteers, training those volunteers, implementing coaches, and helping them grow as leaders, check out ministryboost.org, where we have a membership that you can subscribe to every month and get access to all of our resources there. But watch the video on creating a year-long strategy, create your plan, and then leave a comment below and let me know which of the 4 types of content you're going to do for your next training and what are you going to do in it. I mean, we're church leaders. We would love to learn and share and kind of steal from each other, right? If you've got a great idea for your next training, let us know what that is in the comment below.